Welcome everybody back to Scaled Success Reptile Podcast, episode 47. Um, Good to see everybody. I think it's been in 3 weeks because I had the Tuesdays fall in this past couple weeks. But nice seeing everybody back here. Thank you for joining us tonight. And if you're here right now, make sure you hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. And if you have any questions about Sand Boas, make sure you drop a super chat and drop a chat in the comments down below. So quick, as usual, quick update on what's going on in our world. Just doing the local shows here in South Florida. So, if we've seen you guys here recently this past week in Orlando, Florida, Repticon, nice meeting you. And if you bought an animal from us, thank you for your business. And if you have any questions about it, we're always here to help. And then in any other past Repticons that we have been in the last 2-3 weeks. And then for future shows, May 14th and 15th, we have Reptilian Nation Atlanta. June 14th, 15th, we have Reptilian Nation Atlanta. So that's going to be our first time going to Atlanta. So looking forward to meeting you guys there, seeing what people have, interested in. And we're going to have plenty of Hognose. We might even have babies from this year. We should have hatchlings coming any day now with the countdown has started. That peeking into the incubator every 2 or 3 times a day has started. It's because we're down at already past the 15-day mark on about 3 or 4 clutches. So we might have some animals ready for that. Depends on how they're feeding. And if you're interested in any of our hatchlings from this year, make sure to message us. We are starting a wait list for a couple of the clutches, the lavender stuff, the frost animals that a couple people want. So make sure you get your name in that clutch and that wait list, and let me know what you're interested in. So when they pop out, I give you guys a call or email. So that we got going on. Actually, really excited for the Atlanta show because we've never done Atlanta. And this year we decided to go up and do it. And we've gotten a couple of second clutches already too as well. So that's been very, nice to see. Last year we didn't get second double clutches. This year we've almost got about an 80% rate on double clutches. So, more babies coming down the line as well. So I said, make sure you guys go check our Husbandry Pro incubator. You can add yourself to a wait list specifically for a clutch. So make sure you guys go there. And let's get to our sponsorships and the shout outs first. So we have USARK Florida. If you guys are into reptiles, no matter if you live in Florida or not, make sure to go get a membership with USARK Florida. They are a separate part of USARK National, and they are specifically here to battle any legislation that's happening against reptile, even some other exotic animal species that start here in Florida and can trickle down into other states. We've seen it with the tegus, we've seen it with the berms and all that stuff. But there's been other species that have been targeted. So make sure you guys are keeping up to date with that. Go get a membership. They do have a free membership, even just to get the updates and show support. You can go ahead and do that. The link is in the description below. And we also have USARK National, and they are the nonprofit that fights against national legislations against reptiles and exotic animals. So same thing. Go get a membership there if you haven't, or support some other way. If you're at a vending at a expo that does an auction, go ahead and donate an animal so it could benefit the auction and help USARK keep continuing to do what they do. And now I want to shout out our Patreon. We launched Patreon this year, and it's growing pretty good. Have a handful of people that have joined us there, growing the community. The live chats that we're doing are going great. The video chats. So if you're looking to join a community about Hognose specifically and a couple other species that I'm working with, and get some information on that, and just join a good, healthy reptile community, make sure to go check the link below as well for joining our Patreon. Now, our sponsorships. So Sea Serpents, Incubators, and Racks is one of our sponsors. Chris is the owner. Great customer service we always get from Chris. And he's been into the reptile industry for a very, very long time and a big supporter of USARK and any reptile keeper and breeder. So if you're looking for a PVC rack or incubator, make sure to message Chris. And he's a lot of times he answers himself and deals with the business himself. So great product. We have all the racks from him. And then I know a lot of people that have the incubators that swear by them and do great for them. Now we have Blake's Exotic Feeders. If you're looking to add a couple diversity to your feedings, you want some quails, he has contornix quail and button quails, small enough even for 15, 20 gram hognose babies. So go check that out in the link below. Tell the Clover Reptiles sent you and get some quail in your animals' diets. And not just for hognose, many other species, lizard species, big snakes. He's got all the sizes for you guys. And it's directly from his farm to your doorstep. No middleman. Now, Husbandry Pro, if you want to take your husbandry to record keeping to the next level, you want to make sure you dial down your breedings, your keeping, any information, make sure to try Husbandry Pro with code Clover60 for a 60-day free trial. As I say always, it keeps us so organized, keeps us being able to track if something goes wrong or something changes within our breedings specifically, and dial it down and change it. And that's one thing that we did last year. We missed on some feedings compared to the previous year. This year we changed it up and made sure we got those extra feedings, and the results are showing because we are getting double clutches. So guys, any sponsor, any product that I'm promoting today, we use firsthand. We have a great relationship with them, and I highly recommend them, for you guys to use. If you have any questions about them, send me a DM on Instagram and I'll give you guys any information about it. And with that, let's give a quick shout out to some of our Patreon members. So we have Casey Goff Reptiles Creations. Make sure to go check them out. Give them a follow on Instagram. We have the Herp and Harbins, Alicia and Josh, Hognose and ball python and corn snake breeders. Very knowledgeable, super nice people. Make sure you give them a follow on Instagram as well. We have A. Barton Art, one of our customers that they've gotten a couple of hognose from. Some pretty cool animations that they have, art animations they have there. Make sure to give them a follow. And then we have Nico, another person that got some hognose from us. Make sure to give him a follow. Really knowledgeable person. Has been digging deep into the hognose info. So guys, if you guys want to be part of the Patreon, be part of the family, make sure to follow the link below and go join. So without further ado, let's get our guest out, and make sure you guys drop a comment, hit subscribe to the channel, and hit the like button. Welcome to Scaled Success, Rufus.
Hey, Alvaro. Thank you for having me on tonight.
Yeah, man. Pleasure to have you on. I've heard many great things about your animals, your information, and your knowledge, specifically with the Sand Boas. And I know there's not much information out there on specifically Sand Boas, and even with some of the other species you work with. So I think this is going to be a really good one, because there's a good amount of people out there that enjoy Sand Boas. And I don't think there's enough information out there for them to, properly get all the information you need to get one. A lot of times when I'm at shows, people will come to our table and ask, do you have Sand Boas? Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I say no currently, right? The future that's going to change. But, there are people looking for Sand Boas, because at least once the show, I get the question asked if I have Sand Boas.
Okay. And I noticed last show I was at, of course, that's about all I have at my table. Mm-hmm. But I have some people walk up and they're like, oh, that's hognose,
Yeah.
And so there seems to be some confusion occasionally between your hognose and your Sand Boa. And I also noticed that a lot of my customers are hognose keepers first, because they keep them similarly, and so I do get some kind of crossover there from the Hognose world coming to me to get Sand Boas.
Yeah, that's, I was just telling you backstage, that's how I got into Sand Boas was we picked up one at a Daytona auction for my youngest daughter as a pet, and she fell in love with them, and we've been buying a few here and there for her because that's going to be her breeding project, she says.
Awesome.
She's going to be the Sand Boa girl.
Yeah, she's got good taste.
yeah so, and they're cool, man. Especially seeing like how now that the female that we got are growing and seeing their size get there, it's really cool. And the aneries are so impressive, man. Compared to like other axanthic type genes of other species, I think Sand Boas have probably the best expression of that type.
Yeah, you get some of them that are so clean in terms of that contrast, between that just stark white and the just jet black. There's a lot of contrast there, and so yeah, they're pretty impressive, especially the ones that have that clean look to them.
Yeah, and I always tell people it's like the white, it's almost like a pearl white because there's a sheen to it and stuff like that. So it's very, very cool.
Right.
So we're gonna get more into specific like genetics and stuff like that here later on. But I was just telling you, the first time I think I saw you set up at a show was the first NIRBC Arlington for us, but it was the last Arlington that happened. And I was, blown away by what you had on your table. Really beautiful animals. So it was cool to see that. So tell us a little bit on how you got into the reptile world. Where did it start?
Yeah, sure. It's pretty much been a lifelong passion that I've had, and just always been interested in reptiles and amphibians. Probably like a lot of little kids, they start out, really young. They're interested in dinosaurs, and then they see an iguana and they're like, that's like the live dinosaur, that kind of thing. And so just as a kid growing up in a rural area out in Tennessee, I was always outside looking for salamanders, lizards, snakes, turtles, just catching anything that moves, that I could catch. And I was always trying to keep those as a kid. And so I would keep them in little terrariums, little cages that I kept inside of a barn that we had. Some of them I kept underneath my bed and until a snake got out and got out into a hallway one morning when my mom was walking down the hall. That was the end of my snake keeping indoors, until I turned probably 18. So anyway, I just always had that interest in the wild reptiles and amphibians. And then in my hometown where I grew up there in Manchester, Tennessee, I met our local veterinarian there at the time was Tom Harbin, and he sort of introduced me to the sort of the herpetoculture side, or at least doing it better than I was at the time. And so anyway, he invited me to some shows. Maybe it was 18 or 19 years old, something like that. And so anyway, he and some of his friends, that traveled with him and sold snakes, we would go out to, there was a show out in Texas. It was called the East Texas Herp Show or East Texas Herp Society Show or something. So we went out there 4 or 5 years in a row, and that's actually where I got into Sand Boas. And so I bought my first Sand Boas out there in East Texas. And, I had other species along the way, but those just sort of stuck with me. So even though, back then I had some milk snakes, I bred blue-tongued skinks, leopard geckos, red-eyed crocodile skinks for a while. And
those are cool.
Yeah, they were really neat. And then, and for a while, I worked at Tom's place. He did most of the care and everything, but he was a full-time veterinarian. I did a lot of the cage cleaning there for a couple of years, and that was really interesting. So I I got exposure to all of these python species. He had colubrids at the time, mostly he had. And then that transitioned into eventually the ball pythons. And then he, by the time he got into Hognose, I was already not working for him then. I think he was retired and gone down to Alabama, I think. But
okay.
But so anyway, I had that was kind of the progression there into herpetoculture. He was sort of my mentor. And even when I was in college as well, I worked in a snake lab at a university for a couple of years. And that gave me exposure to native species. So that lab had mostly native, Tennessee species, and so it was just a lot of fun getting to work in that lab. Also worked with in Tom's collection a little bit, and him taking me to shows, and we traveled to several shows together there. Now he did a lot more than I did that I didn't get to go to, but anyway, that was kind of my journey. And then all along the way, I had Sand Boas, even though I was in and out of other projects. And then later, I would say the past, 7 or 8 years, maybe, I've just is mostly just concentrated and focused even more on the Sand Boas and less on the other things.
Nice. So, man, that's interesting. Like, Tom was such a, powerful person to talk to. His conversations are always great. He was such a great person, right? So for you to find that, that person, him early on, man, that's great. That's pretty cool. And I could definitely see like how that could have, it probably helped you, where you're at now, molded you to the, reptile keeper breeder that you are now, man, because he had such great information. Any species that he worked with, he really dived into it.
Yeah, he did. He just went all in on whatever project that he was doing, and he's such a good friend and just such a genuine person, I guess. And I don't know. I feel like I learned a lot, from him over the years, and that was just we just had a lot of fun going to the shows and then talking about even when he moved down to Alabama, and I didn't get to see him as much. I really enjoyed getting to talk to him on the phone about different projects that we had going, and we shared a few projects together over the years. A couple of ball python things, one hognose project, and so anyway, he was just a great mentor and friend. And I would say, he had a lot of influence and impact on me and sort of my journey through this hobby.
Yeah. So what was that first Sand Boa that you got?
Yeah. So I bought a pair of just normals, and I didn't even know there was any color morphs. I know there were at the time, not a whole lot. There might have been 3 or so at that time, but yeah, there was just these this guy that had a pair of adults there, and he had the litter out in this little display. And I remember looking down at them, and they weren't on any sand or substrate. They were just just out there in the open, and I was like, man, these things are so bizarre. The eyes were, as you said, the eyes weren't quite right. They were kind of almost on the top of the head there. And to me, the pattern seemed off. I was like, why is there orange down the middle? It seems like it would be on the sides. And so I just thought, this is a really messed up looking snake here, real bizarre. But the unique things like that tend to draw my interest, And so I thought, man, I gotta learn more about these. And so I bought a pair of them, to find out. And then, and I raised those, ended up buying a few more along the way. And I would say I just had really good luck at the beginning too. The first couple of years of breeding, it's like everything worked, everything produced. I call it beginner's luck. And so it made me think that the Sand Boas were awesome and this great. And so even though since then, I've run into an issue here or there on the reproductive side, I just I thought they were amazing from the beginning.
Yeah, man. And I tell people, it's like when you find that species that really captures your attention and no matter what, right? That's it. And for me, it was the hognose. And then, my daughter, though she loved the hognose from the beginning, I think the Sand Boas have really caught her like attention. She says they're the cutest thing ever and stuff like that, right? So she loves them. But like, I always tell people, it's like, find what really calls your attention and what really calls to you, not for what's popular right now or what's really, you see at the shows, because a lot of people have them at the shows, whatever it is. And I think Sand Boas are a underappreciated species right now.
I think so right now, but they go through cycles. I mean, there's been periods of time where they definitely were more popular. But it seems to just kind of come and go in cycles, and that's okay. I mean, I'm still going to keep them whether they're popular or not. Yeah. And I do think they are maybe a bit, not just the underappreciation. I think it's kind of linked to just some misunderstandings maybe about their behavior. Sometimes I think they might get a little bit of a bad rap on things that aren't quite fair, maybe.
Yeah. So when was your first breeding after getting those handful of Sand Boas?
Babies out there in Texas? Yeah. Let's see. It was probably about 2001 or 2002, somewhere around there, maybe 2001. Yeah. Because I know in the late 90s is when we started going out there to that show in Texas.
Yeah. Man,
it's a long time. I know.
Yeah, that's a while back,
I think so. It's all right. Yeah, so it's probably been a little over 25 years I've been working with Sand Boas. Yeah. And I hate to say this, but like for that amount of time, I really don't know a whole lot about them. I wish I knew more about them. You would think I would with working with them for that long, but.
Yeah. What thing I think I tell people is that, and the hognose isn't, there's a lot more now, but we're still in that like beginning phases of really trying to figure them out. And then with I think the limited amount of people that are keeping Sand Boas, breeding them successfully, there's limited information, right? So it's hard to say, everything or a lot of it, if you only have one experience. You don't have, I don't know if you have people that you bounce your ideas off and stuff like that, or stuff.
That's probably maybe a weak area there. I would say is that, through the majority of that time, I didn't have a lot of people to bounce ideas off of about what was going on with my collection or that type of thing. And when I say that, I mean like people that were keeping Sand Boas specifically,
Yeah.
And now there definitely have been some through the years, just probably not as much. It doesn't seem like as like a big of a community as like the hognose community or the ball python community. So I would maybe have like one or two people, that I talk to regularly about Sand Boas, but not just where you get this, maybe a group of people that have this diversity of opinions and thought and experiences, and you can really make some significant gains in your knowledge. I just don't think I had a lot of that along the way with the Sand Boas.
Yeah, we need to change that. We need to get more people into Sand Boas.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And that's why, and there's certain things I do, like with husbandry, that, I do it because it's worked for me, but, it might not be the best way. And, I'm interested in knowing how other people keep theirs as well. And, and I'd like to learn about their experiences too. It gives me some food for thought, maybe some areas I can improve in and that type of thing.
Yeah. So with the breedings and stuff like that, was it like just trial by fire, put them together, figuring them out?
Yeah. So that long ago when I was breeding them, we didn't have sea serpents and we didn't have, ARS and all that. And I had ended up just buying some homemade melamine racks from Tom. and I set those up in a mini barn that was I'd insulated it and put electricity in there, and it got really hot in the summer. In the winter, I was able to keep it warm enough. And honestly, I probably just got lucky. Nothing went wrong at the beginning. So for, that maybe 3 years or so, I probably kept them like that. And when it was time to put them together, I just put them together. They bred, had babies. Everything was perfectly fine,
Yeah.
And so I didn't really know what I was doing. One thing I kind of learned now, and this is where, I wonder what other people's experiences are too. I do know that some people don't do any type of cycling, no changes in temperature or lighting. They just throw them together, and they'll breed. And I don't know if they're breeding consistently for them. I do know that when you do that, you're likely to get babies any time of the year. Now, what I've always done is got my babies usually at a certain time, like July, August, that time period. And what I learned when I had my beginner's luck, when I kept them, in that mini barn outside, and then when I transitioned them inside, I started having some bad luck. And I was like, oh no, what? And there was no books to read about it. There was really nowhere to go online to figure out what was going on wrong. So I just thought, I was like, man, they were doing better out in this mini barn where there were some temperature swings. There was some, things weren't perfect. And now I bring them inside and they're not doing as well. And so what I started doing in any snake room I've had since then is I have at least one window so some natural light can get in, or at least I can control that natural light. And then I also change the temperatures a little bit throughout the year. I do a little bit of cycling there.
Okay.
Temperatures. And I don't really know if those two things matter, but that's something that I do. And it seems to correlate pretty well with this sort of predictable time that they're going to reproduce. And things once I started doing that, things trended back toward, where they were before, where I was having good success producing them.
Okay. And it's interesting to think about light cycling for a nocturnal species, right?
Sure.
So, but it has to work, right? They need to know when's daylight, night, and stuff like that. It's interesting. It's like, I wonder if there's people that keep him in like a, let me ask you actually, what kind of tubs do you keep him in? Do you keep him like full dark tubs or clear?
I've always done clear or like an opaque type tub. And just recently, I experimented with some of the gray ARS tubs, and so those are a bit darker. It seems to work fine so far, but other than that, I have always had like a clear or an opaque tub where light could get in.
Yeah, man, I wonder if that makes a difference. Especially being like I said, they're nocturnal animals, but in the wild, they are experiencing day-night cycles, right? Not all the time dark. I wonder if that's got to make a difference if people do keep them in, full grayed out, tubs that light can't get through. If they're seeing any maybe any difference in their breeding cycles or behavior, that'd be interesting to see. And then with temperatures, the way you fluctuate, is it like ambient temperature, or you're doing temperature like heat on the racks?
I do both.
Okay.
Yep. And again, I don't think it's probably not necessary, but I think it just helps more with the timing, maybe the timing of the reproduction more so than just having it happen. But yeah, what I do with the ambient temperatures in my Sand Boa room is I just I let it get warm in the summer. Like right now it's 79 degrees ambient air temperature. I'll let it go up to 81 before I want to cut that off or start to maybe cool that back down, or not let it get any higher. And so I'll let it climb up to 81, and then in the fall, I'll just start to dial that back down. And by the winter, so the, kind of 2 months there in the winter, say part of December, January, about half of February, I will just let it go down to about 70 to 72 degrees. That's your ambient. That's the ambient air temperature. So I guess you're going from a short period of time of about 70, 72 to the peak in the summer of maybe, 80, 81.
Mm-hmm.
And then the heat during that time that it's 70 to 72, I turn the heat off on the adults. I just let them be at that temperature and I don't feed them.
Okay.
And then once I start to warm them back up, I'll start feeding them again, and I'll just gradually warm that heat back up to where they have a hot spot of about 85 to 90, maybe a little bit above 90, but something like that.
Okay, man. And you know what? Think about that species too. Bringing them down to the low 70s is interesting too. I wonder if, like you said, if people are cycling as well, like you are.
Well, I don't know. And of course, that is with the Kenyan Sand Boa. I do work with some other Sand Boas, and I do treat them a little differently. But with the Kenyan Sand Boas, that's what I do. And, I knew some other breeders that did that or had a similar practice. Mm-hmm. I also talked with someone who had visited Tanzania, specifically the Doma, and they shared with me what the conditions were like there in the few months that they were there. Mm-hmm. And they told me, they said they were shocked and surprised at how cold it got at night. And, they said, they didn't feel like they needed a jacket, but they told me that it was surprisingly cold to them, especially for how hot it got during the day. And so I don't know if that was 60s, 70s or what exactly, but I thought, hey, these things are, cooling off a little bit at night at least. Yeah. And I don't remember exactly either. I should have probably looked at this before we talked, but to see if there's maybe some sort of, weather or climate data.
Well, while you're saying that, I'm looking it up, and and the cool season, it says nighttime 55 to 65.
So there you go.
Yeah. So it drops down a good amount. And I've been to like Middle Eastern countries and stuff like that, where like July, June, July, August, it is super hot mid 90s, low hundreds. And then, like October, November, it drops down hard. And it's just, if especially the Kenyans, if they're from, any area where it's just wide open, sandy area, there's not really much to keep the heat in, right? So it drops at night, and once the winter comes in, it's got to be low. Yeah.
So yeah. I think it probably gets maybe like you're seeing there, just a little bit lower temperatures than what a lot of us would probably suspect or think. So yeah, that's it seems to work pretty well that I drop the temperatures during the winter, and then when I do raise them in the summer, I'll bring those lows up as well, and I pretty much at the peak of summer, it's going hot all the time.
Okay. Yeah. So you saying what, 95? You said for their hot spot and stuff like that.
Yeah. If you do 90 to 95, they'll pick out what they want. It's going to depend, of course. Like, did they just eat? Was it a big meal? And then, of course, like if they're gravid, like a gravid female, she's going to go right to 93, and so she'll pick that out and just stay right there most of her gestation. Yeah.
So. And you're keeping more than just Kenyan Sand Boas, right?
Right. You have. Go ahead.
Yeah. You have the Russians and the Arabians, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Am I missing any other species of Sand Boas?
No, I've dabbled in a few of the others, but I just don't have much experience with those.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Russian Sand Boas and the Arabians also work with.
Okay. And how do they differ on heat and like setup between the Kenyans?
So yeah, I mean, so if you look at the Arabians, they they like it hot during the summer, and they do really well with the hot. But in the winter, when I'm getting them ready to breed, I do cool them also down to really I get them down to about 65 or 68, somewhere between there, for about 2 months in total darkness. And so I take them to a separate room, and I there's an area of my basement in the winter that stays about that temperature.
Yeah.
And that's where the Arabians go. And I make sure they have total darkness. And that seems, when you bring them back up out of that and they start feeding again, once you've warmed them up, then they start to breed. And so that seems to work that way. So the temperatures there, very similar to the Kenyan, except maybe a little colder. And I do complete darkness. I don't worry about that with the Kenyans, but the only reason I do with the Arabians, I'm not sure if there's anything to it, but when I look back in my notes, and there's a little correlation there between their reproductive success, getting eggs, that type of thing, and when I kept them in total darkness versus when I didn't. Because over the years I would do it both ways, and I noticed, I was like, man, when I'm putting them in total darkness, this is working out pretty good, and so I just still do that. Now the Russians are a different story, and we can talk about those too if you want to.
And I wanted to bring this up, the picture of the Arabian, man, because I think this is one of the funkiest looking, Sand Boas with the eyes right on top of the head. With the Kenyans, they at least have them still on the side. And do you know why it's such a difference in the heads of their eyes?
Not exactly. My guess is just an adaptation to their environment, which is a little bit different than the Kenyan. So those Kenyans coming from, maybe savanna type habitat, and then you've got the Arabians, which are in Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait. And so these are true desert dwellers, and they're sand swimmers. And so when they go under the sand, you can tell they're made for it. They just swim right under the sand, and then they'll pop those two eyes out, and that'll be the only thing, above the surface.
You'll see
there. Yeah. And so I'm guessing that's just so that, they can see their surroundings. They can see when maybe some prey is coming by, but nothing sees them.
Yeah, man. That's so cool. And right, like people, and it's funny because I told one of our friends that breeds Kenyan Sand Boa, Gabe Maldonado. I told him, man, it's like one day I was like really looking at Sand Boas, and I was just staring at it. I was like, man, I go, you know what they look like? They look like Jar Jar Binks from Star Wars.
Yeah. I was like, they got the idea from these,
Yeah. I was like,
these were here first, but yeah.
I go, they have the elongated face, big eyes, stuff like that. I go, and he's like, man, nobody's ever said that to me before.
No, when I watched that movie, that I noticed the resemblance.
Yeah, man. So it's cool to see something like that. So, and now like with the Russians, with their setup, what is their setup like?
Okay. Yeah. So this is, man, the Russians, they are probably the most, I'm trying to think of the word here, not robust, but just, they are a tough Sand Boa. Your Arabians are fairly delicate, I think. Okay. The Kenyans are kind of in the middle. And then the Russians are just a really durable, type of animal. They can withstand temperature extremes in their natural environment of, into the hundreds, down to freezing temperatures. And so they have a shortened growing season over most of their range. So it's not just Russia, but they have a really extensive range. A lot of it's kind of like high desert steppe, that kind of thing. And so you go from like maybe southern Dagestan, Russia, into Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, all the stands, right? And over into all the way over to Mongolia and parts of Western China. It's like a over 2,000 miles.
Wow.
This range. And if you look at the climate and weather data across that range where they're found, it's just rugged. And that's maybe the term I was looking for. Mm-hmm. These sand boas are very rugged, and man, they're exposed to very extreme temperatures. It's the summers that'll get really hot but then cool down at night because it's that high desert. And then in the winter, you know, they in some areas, like in Kazakhstan, some of the areas where they're found, they'll have a 6-month or 7-month winter, and 3 out of those 6 months, the average temperature is not even above freezing. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, they're digging down and probably trying to stay out of the way of those freezing temperatures. But you know, I feel like they are highly adapted to these extremes, these different environmental extremes. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that we do in captivity is to actually increase reproductive success is cool the adults down before we breed them. And not just like with the Kenyans where we turn off the heat for a couple of months. These go, for me, I put them in a wine cooler for 3 months at about 45 degrees. All right. And that seems to do the trick. Now that I've talked with some other people that breed Russians, and they don't cool them down quite that much, and they still have success. Mm-hmm. They do more of what I call like a soft cool down, where they'll go down to maybe, you know, 60, 65, something like that. Now with that, I guess it still works, but they're not really going to hibernate. They're not really going to go to sleep. They're going to, you know, they're still going to need water. They're going to be moving around. But if you get them down to 45, and really that cutoff for most of them is about 49, you'll notice they stop moving. Yeah. And they just go to sleep. They don't need food or water. And I leave them that way for 3 months. In the wild, I suspect they're there a lot longer than that.
Yeah, especially in those, like you said, like Kazakhstan and stuff like that, those areas. Yeah, getting close to like Himalayas and stuff like that. It's got to be. Mm-hmm. It's got to be.
That's the thing you'll see. Yeah, they're higher. They are at a much higher elevation than Arabians, and also, you know, higher than the Kenyans as well. So, and so I do a hard cool down where I take them down to 45. Again, I don't know that getting them that cold is necessary, but it's just the way I've always done it. Mm-hmm. When I bought my first trio from Bruce Miller back in, I think it was like 2008 or 9 or something like that, he had told me that that's how he cooled his down. And so I did that. I just didn't have a wine cooler at the time. I cooled them out in a garage. I just threw them out in a garage here in Tennessee in some containers, and got lucky, I guess. But anyway, so for several years, I actually just cooled them down in the winter in a garage. But over time, for different reasons, I decided to go with the wine cooler for a little bit more stability in the temperatures and so on. And so anyway, that cooling them like that seems to really help. Mm-hmm. Increase that the reproduction is really consistent then, and the timing is really consistent. You know, I can really predict pretty well when they're going to start breeding, when they're going to have their babies and everything by doing that cool down. You know,
same thing with the Hognose, man. You know, and you know, you've bred the Hognose before too. Mm-hmm. It's I've heard people not do brumation and still have success, but here and there compared to, you know, years that they did do brumation. And it also helps with that dialing that time frame of when the breeding starts, right?
Yeah, I think so.
That helps a lot, especially I think it was like, you know, we can't, you know, like with Hognose, we can't ultrasound because they're so small. You know, trying to figure out things. Yeah, trying to figure out those you know, the ovulation period and stuff like that. It's almost impossible with that. So that's another big benefit of brumation is all right, the season starts now. They're coming out of plumation, and you start pairing, you start feeding, you know, all that stuff.
Exactly.
But yeah, and this picture of the Russian, is this like the standard look of a Russian?
That's a black. That's a black
Okay.
phase, black Russian, and they do look like that in some parts of the wild. This, I guess you'd call it like melanistic or hypermelanistic phase. The ones that were imported here, they came from parts of Kazakhstan and Dagestan, which is on that sort of northwest shore of the Caspian Sea.
Okay.
And so, and you can, the cool thing is you can find through iNaturalist. I don't know, do you know what iNaturalist is? If you start, you know, poking around on there, and you'll see Russians all across the range that I was telling you about. And when you run into the black ones, they're in that area in Kazakhstan and part of Dagestan, Russia.
Yeah. And then, so then we have one of the super black extreme. What is this? Extreme super black?
Yeah. I just call them extremes because when I work with these, I would breed some of these to kind of select for that, you know, more black, hyper pigmentation, whatever you call it. And anyway, or maybe I should say hypermelanistic, but yeah, the extreme super black, it's black on the bottom, the top, the sides. There's no, you know, like probably not a white fleck on the thing, you know, like there was on the other ones. And they always, you can see like with that one, all of the scales on the head are going to be black, no gray on there at all. And so it is more rare to get, especially like this extreme super black, to get them with no, you know, flecks or spots on them at all like that. And so anyway,
even the eyes are black on this, right?
Yeah, everything's black. Yeah, it's just jet black. And what's cool is it's kind of like it's like a satiny sheen on the top when they're moving. You know, you see this kind of satiny. Some people at the shows tell me it's metallic, you know, so maybe some sort of metallic look on the back as they're moving. And then when you pick them up, the belly is like, I don't know how to describe it other than like black glass, you know, you almost
like obsidian or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that's cool.
So they're just, you know, there are some other dark sand boas in the world, like maybe some of the solid colored rufescens, but they have a white belly, you know. This is the only one that so far that is just, you know, black from top to bottom, nose to tail.
Okay. Yeah. And then how many Sand Boas are you breeding? Like at least the Russians are you breeding?
Russians, I usually do anywhere from 4 to 6 females. Yeah. You know, I have them go in a year, 4 to 6 females.
All right. And with because we have another one here too, where it's the cinnamon. You know, with the Russians, how does the genetics work there with either like the super black or the cinnamon?
Yeah, man, there's a lot left to be learned about the genetics with these. They're not as straightforward as with the Kenyans. There's only one like recessive, known recessive so far with them, which is the albino. The cinnamon here, this one and the black, it seems that cinnamon, for example, you breed cinnamon to cinnamon, you get cinnamons, right? You breed cinnamon to black, that black is a dominant, sort of overrides, but you don't get all black. You get about maybe half of them may turn out black. Some of them might be super black, and so there's a lot of variation in the black and in the cinnamon look. Like that cinnamon you got there on the screen was just an exceptional specimen. Some of them are just kind of a plain brown, you know.
Okay.
And then some of them are beautiful, they have brown and red in them. But anyway, I think a lot of this, of what we see in the Russians in terms of color variation, is polygenic.
All right.
A lot of polygenic things going on there.
And then you mentioned too, like when you're looking at ag naturalists, where some of the darker looking ones and stuff like that, is it as locality too and stuff like that?
Yeah. And from what I know, I've read just a few research papers here and there over. There's not a lot, or I wasn't able to find a whole lot, but there was one hypothesis there that was mentioned, I guess, where the darker ones, they were in an area where it got cooler. They were also closer to rivers, and it kept the air temperature a little bit cooler at night, and so the thought there was that by the animals being darker, they would be able to warm up faster during the day, kind of, as a part of that thermoregulation process. They'd just be able to get to whatever threshold temperature they needed to be at faster than if they were not that dark. Yeah. And so it may be an adaptation. However, the thing that I don't know that it's that straightforward, and here's why I say this is, in those areas where you find the melanistic types, you'll also find the other ones that are not. It's just that there's a greater proportion of those dark ones, but you still see some that are not black in that area. It's kind of almost like here in Tennessee, I think about Eastern Hognose.
Yeah.
So like Eastern Hog, when I was a kid, I'd catch Eastern Hognose, and most of them, had that brown and black patchy pattern or whatever with the reds in there, and there's just beautiful. But anyway, then every once in a while I catch one that was melanistic.
Yeah.
Just, really dark black. And so you have them, both of those here in Tennessee, in the same area. And it looks like that's what's happening with the Russians. Yeah. Just for some reason, though, those dark ones, where they are found mixed in with the others, it seems to only be in those areas in Kazakhstan.
Interesting. Yeah, man. And this is really cool to be able to talk these obscure Sand Boa species too. And do you see like the Russians and Arabians, more people getting into them now and stuff like that?
Yeah. So I do. There's a lot of interest in Arabians. Unfortunately, we just don't have very many here in the United States. The Russians, though, there seems to be sort of a niche interest, I guess. And so I do have people, ask me or contact me and question about when am I going to have Russians available. They're interested in the Russians. They want to know about them. However, I don't know, over maybe, I'm just going to guess, like past 7-8 years, that I've really, produced more Russians and sold to people. A lot of the Sand Boa people that would buy from me, they would get to the point to breed them and they just wouldn't breed them. And they just said they didn't want to cool them down. And so what you see is that, like in a community, like the Sand Boa community, it's really common. You just got to keep your animals warm. And so I've talked with a lot of people, they just didn't feel right in getting those animals cold. And whereas this is what I find interesting is some of the hognose keepers that bought from me, that bought Russians from me, they have gone on to breed them successfully. And so a little bit of crossover there, but I'm seeing hognose people buy Russian Sand Boas and, being able to breed those. And I guess they're used to
the brumation part. Yeah.
They're comfortable with that already. Right.
Yep.
And so it's no big deal when they get to a Russian. They're like, yeah, we'll just cool it down too,
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? And we get the same thing with hognose, where that's a lot of the people that want to breed hognose. That's a big hold back for them. It's like, I got to first the whole process. Like I got to stop feeding them, figure out a whole nother setup to cool them down. It becomes a big thing. I think it becomes a big thing in our minds because we think about, is a reptile, it needs heat to live, you know? And I think, as I tell people, once you get over that hurdle of the brumation part and stuff like that, I go, breeding the Hognose is not that difficult. You know, and then the brumation is pretty simple too as well. Now, let me ask you, what type of medium do you use for like the Russians when you brumate them in the wine cooler?
I've used two different things. Mm-hmm. I've used the Santa chip, like I guess like PJ Murphy's Santa chip, or you know that it's a chipped aspen. Yep. The other thing I still use, and I used it from the beginning, and I don't know why. I just what started it, but I had some Carefresh bedding. It's like for rabbits, I guess, and for mammals mostly. It's kind of a paper. I guess it's paper based, and this Carefresh bedding, and I thought to myself, well, they're not going to be feeding. They're just sleeping, right? Yeah. And so I took a container, like a deep container for the females, and I just packed it full of that Carefresh, and then they'll just go down into the, just dig down into that. And I did that for years, but since then I've used a combination. I'll use that, or I'll use the Santa chip. But those are the only two things I've used in the cool downs.
Okay.
What do you guys use with the Hognose?
So, and I'll tell you, like a lot of people used probably Sand chips or shaved aspen for many years. Okay. And then over now, I think the last couple of years, people have switched over to using moist coco coir. Because a lot of people were getting respiratory infections from, I guess, the dust and the cool down on their Hognose, and they were coming out very, very dry.
Right.
So switching over, since I started, I've always done the coco coir, and great, right? They keep well hydrated during the time, like they absorb it from the coco coir. Sometimes even there's droplets on the lid, so if they want to they probably drinking some from the lid if they find it. And I think that's the best thing to do. And same thing, I go down to, last year I even went down to, I think, 45 degrees with my Hognose. At least the thermostat was set down to 45. So on average, it was probably like between 45 and 48 in the I have a fridge, so it went well.
Well, that's in, I'd heard that from some other Hognose breeders too, about maybe a little bit of dehydration if it's too dry. Is that right? Yeah. And so I think that might be one difference between your hogs and your Russian Sand Boas, is that the Russians seem to do really well with the dry cool down. They, and their scales are a little bit different than the hogs. You can kind of see, what is it? It's kind of like almost like a little bit of a keeled
there's a keeled scale.
And you can see the skin in between. On the Russians, I mean, those scales are just sealed up, Correct. And I think they must hold a little bit more moisture in the skin or something. They're just, because when I put them down for the 3 months and they don't drink a drop of water, and when I bring them back out and I weigh them, and so I've got, over several years where I would keep the weights of the males and the females, before and after cool down, and the average body weight, like the average loss of body weight, is about 2.5%. And so, and it ranges, 1 point something to 4.5%, percent. But to me, it's a very small, they're just losing maybe a few grams.
Yeah.
During that time. And they don't look emaciated. They don't look dehydrated. And so I don't think it really matters that they're in such a dry cool down. Whereas with the hogs, it does seem to, be better if they have some humidity there.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes sense with like just their environment where they're from, right? Hogs are from the plains, and there's moist soil and all that stuff, where it seems like the Russians are more of a definitely drier area, more, arid.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. And even with, if you compare within the, like within the Eryx genus, I guess, the Sand Boas, your Kenyans, they will experience, in captivity, they'll experience shed issues if that humidity drops too low. However, with the Russians, they can go a lot lower and it won't really matter. Like Kenyans, sometimes I think people keep them too low. They just don't they just assume, though they're a desert species, they need it really dry, right? But a Kenyan around 50% humidity is going to be really good for their skin condition, and they're not going to have shedding issues. If it gets down to like 30, they're going to start to experience issues. But at about 30 with Russian Sand Boas, they don't have any problem at all.
Okay.
So the really dry conditions, they still shed out in one clean piece. So it seems like they're just adapted for that dry environment during the summer, the winter, all the time.
Yeah. So, and you're bringing up a good point, because I've never even thought about humidity for Sand Boas. Luckily here in South Florida, like even in our house, our ambient's like 45 degree, 45%.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah, so it works out. But for somebody that's in a drier area, are you adding like any moisture and stuff like that to the Kenyans?
Yeah, and actually, I probably, when it comes to substrate, I probably do things maybe a little different than what's conventional with Kenyan Sand Boas. Everyone has their opinion. Substrate's a hotly debated topic, I think, in the Kenyan Sand Boa community. And, ultimately, I think they do well on a broad range of substrates. They seem highly adaptable. They seem to do well. However, when it comes to things like the skin conditioning and the humidity issues, the substrate you use is like a tool that can help you either change humidity, maintain humidity. And so one of the things that I often use, it's not the only substrate that I use, but a substrate that I run most of the summer, especially, is cypress mulch.
Okay.
And so I use cypress mulch. You can run it. It's very versatile. See, like you can run it dry. If you see any issues, or if they go into a shed, you can just water one end of the enclosure if you want to, or you can mist the enclosure, however you want to do that. And that cypress will hold on to that moisture pretty well. And, you contrast that with something like aspen. Aspen's going to give you a drier environment.
Yes.
But that cypress, it'll give you the humidity you need if you're having problems with your humidity. But on the flip side, you can just let it run dry too if you want to. And in that sense, it's just as good as the aspen. And I've heard similarly, I do know some people that they don't use cypress, but they'll use the cocoa, Yeah. Okay. Kind of the same thought there. You can use it as a tool to help control humidity.
Nice. And it's interesting because, right, like same thing when people ask about Hognose setup and all that stuff. Very dependent on locality where you're at. What's where you're keeping them. If you're keeping them inside your house, in a shed separate from the house, it changed so many variables, right? So it's hard I tell people it's hard to put everything in one straight line of this is how you do it, different things. This is how you can do it. This is how it's working. But you got to figure out what works best. You set a baseline, you figure out what works best for you in your environment and stuff like that. So that's very interesting to think about the cypress and stuff. I keep mine on sand chips because I keep my Hognose on sand chips and they do well, but I have the extra humidity that helps out. So, that's interesting to hear, now to think about two together.
Yeah. And, there were other places that I lived, here in Tennessee, but like in different houses or different, different areas that the humidity was higher and the sand chip worked perfect there. Where I'm at right now, I do use some sand chip with them, but most of the time it's that cypress just to, because it's a little drier where I'm at right here in this particular house,
Yeah.
So,
and one thing about that I've never seen my Sand Boas do is drink water. What's your experience with the watering and providing water and stuff like that?
I always keep fresh water for them. Yeah, because I noticed they do drink. The Russians and the Kenyans both drink. The Arabians, it's very rare that I see one drink any water. However, I always keep some there for them anyway. Yeah, just in case they want it.
Correct.
So,
So you have experience seeing the Sand Boas like drinking the water and stuff like that?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's and with my collection as I go through and check on them, I mean, I probably every time, I probably run into one or two every day that are actively drinking while they're either actively drinking or they got their head over in there, like, they've been caught drinking and, looking up at you like, what's going on, but yeah, I think they do drink pretty frequently.
Yeah. Another thing too is like thinking about it, with them being a nocturnal species and stuff like that. Do you see activity during the day? Or
a little bit, but yeah, I think it's mostly at night. Is definitely with the Arabians, man, they are almost strictly nocturnal. Kenyans, they'll be active sometimes during, but it's mostly nocturnal. The Russians, though, they're a different. they're just kind of they're a different species. Yeah. And their behavior is very different than the Kenyans, and so they are more. And how a Kenyan they're just kind of, if you open up the enclosure, they just sit there to wait and kind of see what are you gonna do, But a Russian, you open up the enclosure, they'll come up to you. They're like, they're looking for food, or if they discover you don't have food, then they'll come out onto your hand. They're very different behaviorally in that regard. They're very outgoing, and so anyway, they like to explore, and they are more active during the day. I've noticed they're active at night too. It seems like they're just
whenever they're feeling
whenever. I think I would say in the wild, a lot of those are going to be active during the day because of how cold it is at night.
Very true.
Yeah,
that's very true.
So I noticed they're more active during the day, here in captivity, and just active in general. They stay above substrate. They will burrow,
Okay.
But they stay above substrate a lot more than a Kenyan.
Okay. Yeah. And again, this is my first species, first nocturnal species, first constrictor as well, because hognose aren't.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting to do the feedings, right? When they're like you're hovering right over there, you can see their little nose hovering and that quick snap to bring it, in. It's very interesting. Our first one we had, I did have it in a naturalistic setup with sand and stuff like that.
Cool, yeah.
So it was cool to see like it would drag like when it was very small, it would drag the picky back under the sand and disappear.
Yeah.
So that was really cool to see that behavior. And I tell people it's an interesting animal to watch. It's like you just gotta sometimes stay up late to watch them, right?
Yeah. Hey, it fits some people's lifestyle 100%. Really well.
100%. Yeah.
The part of my lifestyle that it fit really well wasn't so much the staying up late, but it was the ease of care and everything. It's not like I'm keeping chameleons here, and so it's just through the different sort of stages of life and the changes and whatever. There are certain animals that I had to say, I just had to be honest and say, well, I'm not going to be able to take care of these anymore, and I need to, move them. Whereas with the Sand Boas, I've just always been able to make those work, because they're so easy.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I think they're great. Even as a starter pet, I think they're great because setup is easy. You get good, healthy, well-started animal, and feeding is great. And they get that. It's funny because like their size is, to explain somebody their size, and their body structure is so unique. And I want to give me a couple examples on like the difference in body structure and size between the three species that you have.
Yeah, sure. So like your Arabians are your smallest, right? Okay. And it depends whether you're talking about male or female. All right, so all three species very sort of sexually dimorphic, and so you're going to get the males are a lot smaller in all three species. But if you look at like Arabians, I mean, a male, it may be 40, 45 grams, ready to breed. They can get bigger, but they won't. They're not. I don't know that I've seen one push over 100. Yeah. And so they're really small. The females, they 250, 300 grams, something like that.
Okay.
Now I've had some go well past that, 400 something grams, but that's rare. So you're looking at, maxing out probably around 300 grams most time.
Okay. Very similar to like hognose sizes.
Yeah. And Russians, also very, very different between your males and females there. The Russians, a breeder male, he may be 50. I'll tell you what, the average is 60 for me. Over the time I've kept them, 60 grams is my average breeder male.
Okay.
My average breeder female is 357 grams. And so you could just say maybe 350, right? I've had some push up to 500 grams, but that's pretty rare, So again, you're looking at Russians maxing out around, 350, 400, something like that. Then the Kenyans, the males, a 75 gram male is really probably more typical to breed. I've had some breed at 50 grams, but I've seen 75 to 150 gram,
okay,
or larger, but that's probably your 75 to 150 grams. That's a male Kenyan, Now you get into the females. It's pretty wide range there, but some stay small at like 250, 280, somewhere in there, but on up to, I've seen 1,000 gram females,
Yeah.
And so they can get big.
Yeah. And they're very wide body animals, right? Like
once they hit like 6, 7 years old, the females, they'll have that big, wide, flat body a lot of times. Yeah.
And bringing up age, on average, what's your average breeding age that you have for them?
Males, they tend to run about 2 years, but they will breed earlier, every 18 months, but 2 years for a male. Females, 3 years, probably the minimum.
Okay.
Some of them might need longer than that,
Yeah.
Just kind of depends on how they're looking, how their body condition is. There's some, for example, kind of rule of thumb that I hear oftentimes is with the females, maybe get them at least to 300 to 400, somewhere in there before you breed them.
Yeah.
However, I think you got to consider age too. So I do think, if you're at a 3-year-old and it's 400 grams, it's probably okay.
Yeah.
But if you've got a 250 gram female at 3 years old, might need to wait a little while. So for example, the smallest one that I remember breeding is, I bred a female that was 280 grams, but she was 5 years old and she was just a short snake. You know, she looked, thick and she had good muscle and, she's just a short snake and, filled out that short size at 280 and she had a perfectly healthy litter.
And that's, I think, another thing to think about where, they're live birthers, right? So like having that mature body, I think is even more important than a leg 8 year because, their gestation period, they're developed the whole baby through the whole process.
With
them, with the Kenyans, how long from, and this is very interesting, right? Because again, I've only worked with animals that have laid eggs, at least bred. And so can you walk us through your breeding process of the Kenyans?
Yeah, sort of like a timeline. Something. Sure. So I usually start pairing that. They don't breed. I'll get 1 or 2 that breed right away. I probably pair them too early, but I pair them on Valentine's Day.
Okay.
And so easy to remember, right? And so I pair them on Valentine's Day. I might get 1 pair that go right then, but most of my breeding activity starts around April and where I'm at here. And so around April, I get a lot of breeding activity. This time of year, I'll start to get the post-ovulatory sheds. So if you looked at from maybe a timeline from when they become gravid, what's going to happen is you'll go say from conception to the post-ovulatory shed, usually about 16. Well, let me go back. Maybe ovulation. That might be a better way to. Yeah. There we go. From ovulation to the post-ovulatory shed is about 16 days. Somewhere in there, and then after that post-ovulatory shed, the average that I have in my collection is about 65 days till they give birth. So if you keep up the way I simplified it is this time of year, I just document every shed that the female has. And that way I can, like if she sheds today, I'll count out 65 days and I go, there's your due date. Right. And of course it varies. There's a typical range be 62 to 70, 72 maybe days. But there's different things that'll make that vary, like age, temperature, of course. Yeah. Maybe even genetics. I'm not sure, but that 65 days seems to work pretty well. And I'll start, what you do is by knowing that due date, you start to pay attention to that animal maybe the week before, what their behavior, if we're looking at behavior changes. And so they start becoming a little restless, roaming the cage. You're just maybe a day or two out at that point.
Okay. And then when they're close to that birth date, do you still do cypress or sandy chips and stuff like that, or do you change?
Hey, that's a good question. This is where I wonder what other people do too, because I know this is not the most popular substrate by far. I know a lot of people use like a sand topsoil mix and different kinds, and it seems very anecdotal, but it seems like a lot of people like that. But anyway, what I do is this is a time where I go heavy on the cypress. And so all my females get switched over to cypress when they're getting close to actually, as soon as they start laying on that heat, that's when I make sure they're all on cypress if they're not already. And I also keep all the females in big tub rack systems. And so I will pack the back end of that with cypress so that it's thick. The one thing I guess I should have maybe said before is I don't keep the substrate very deep. On most of my Sand Boas. I keep a shallow substrate that just barely covers their back. However, when you're looking at these females, you can imagine that tub, it's got a shallow substrate till I get to the back, and I push and stack that substrate up thick in the back. And what this does is they'll go in there, and the heat, it's going to warm all the way around their body. So that's one thing I don't know if it matters, but I didn't want just belly heat warming the belly. I wanted them to choose. They can kind of pick, right? Yeah. And where they want to be in that cage. But they go back. They tend to just go right back in there. Anytime I pull them out, maybe check on them, they'll be warm. Their whole body's warm all the way around there. And so that's what I do. And when they get close, when they get close to having to dropping a litter, I also like to add a little moisture back there. Okay. Make sure it's wet back there. I just tend to think that helps with the birthing process a little bit to have a little bit more humidity.
No, for sure. And what about water bowls and stuff like that? Do you always keep the water bowl even when they're like getting close to that birthing date?
I do, and I keep it closer to the cool end of the enclosure, and so I always provide them with fresh water, whether they're using it or not.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about that. When eventually, hopefully, we get to breeding the Sand Boas, is seeing the live birth and dealing with the aftermath of it, right?
It's cool.
Because I've seen pictures and stuff that it's that goo all over the place, all those little babies and stuff like that. On average, what's your litter size?
Well, with the Sand Boas, it kind of again depends on weight and age and so on. But you get usually 10 to 15. Well, no, let me take that back. They're probably more around that 15 range, but they can go higher. I've had a few that had over 20.
Yeah.
I know of breeders that have had up to like 40. That doesn't seem very common. But I think that 15, even as they get older, up to 20 range that's about average there. What it works out to is about like with the Kenyans, you end up getting about one baby per every 30 grams of female.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah. And so with the Russians though, a little bit different. You get a little less, I guess, for the body weight. You get one for about every 32.5 grams of female there, and the litter average too is lower, is 11. Over the course of time I've been keep up with it with the Russians that I have. Instead of your 15 or 20, the average is right on 11.
Okay.
For the litter for Russians, a little bit smaller.
Yeah. And then, one big thing that, with different species is feeding schedules during breeding process. So like, let's say February, Valentine's Day, do you change your feeding schedule sizes?
Yeah. So the females, I'm just most of them. I'm not, if I'm cooling them, I'm not feeding them. The same with the males. And then what I do with the warm up, I will start pairing them, but I also feed them during that time. I just separate them to feed. So, they may be together a couple of days, 3 days or so. And then I'll take the male out and I may give him a really small meal, maybe give him a fuzzy. And I don't feed them much during the breed. Some of them won't eat, and that's fine. If they don't want food, if they refuse it, no big deal.
Yeah. The
females, though, they're usually always going to eat. And so I do feed the females a little heavier right out of that time. I would estimate, every 5-6 days, probably on those females. But I'm careful I don't want to get them too fat, but I do want them to gain in a little bit of weight.
Yeah.
And the males, I'm just really kind of take the stance on, if they're hungry, give them a little, fuzzy and just go on. You're not trying to get them to gain weight. You don't want them to be fat and lethargic during that time. You want them to be active, breeders. So anyway, that's kind of how the feeding scheme goes during that process. Now, once the female's gravid, usually like one of the signs of them being gravid is they might refuse food. And so they might refuse food only for a couple feedings, and then they'll go back to eating. And if that's the case, I usually am still very kind of reserved about how much I feed them. At that point, once I know they're gravid, I don't feed them every 5 days, and I feed them a small meal. I just don't want to overfeed them during that. And I have some females that won't eat at all while they're gravid. And I don't worry about that at all. I just let it go, if they don't want to eat, that's fine. And those are the ones that usually they might need a little bit more time to recover. And sometimes they might not breed the next year, So they're all a little different.
Yeah, I guess loading that calorie intake before the process, the most important part. And it's interesting because like I hear, my friends that have ball pythons, same thing. Like, once they start going through the ovulation and stuff like that, it's just they start shutting down on food. Where hognose, they're nonstop. Like
they just okay.
The day before they're laid, they'll keep eating if it's feeding day and stuff like that. And I with them, I do give them like, even if like, hey, it's 14, 15 days after pre-lay shed. I know it's about to lay anytime soon, and it's a feeding thing. You're getting a meal, because that's one of the things I try to give to try to avoid them eating their eggs as well. Make sure they have a full belly. Doesn't work all the time, but
pretty. Yeah, they're pigs.
yeah, pretty good. I had that situation on Friday. I know there was a female gonna lay. All the females that are laying eggs and breeding need to eat that day. And I was leaving to Orlando for a Repticon, and I feed the morning, give my females a good sized meal, and I tell my wife, I call her like around 6:30. I'm still on the road. I say, hey, this female's gonna lay eggs. Can you double check her? And be careful because she's skittish and she'll eat her eggs, or she'll try to dart out the lay bin. Mm-hmm. She pulls it open. She goes, yeah, she looks like she's laid eggs. She looks, she's done. I guess by the few seconds that she turned around to grab the incubation bin to put the eggs in it, by the time she turned around, the female's already eaten the egg.
Oh man!
You know, and this year I go, she ate about 6 to 7 eggs this year between the 2 clutches.
Good thing they laid 2 clutches.
yeah, for sure, man.
There's recycling nutrients.
Yeah, so like, you know, even feeding a good meal, still ate that egg. So it's an interesting part of breeding hognose.
Yeah, I do remember like when I kept hognose, I just thought, man, these things eat a lot.
Yeah,
they're just non-stop, you know. I mean, Sand Boas can eat when they're when a Sand Boa is growing. Some of them will eat very frequently, but not. I mean, hognose are just they can out eat a Sand Boa. So
for sure, just I tell people, it's like, if especially during that you know, breeding season, they're gravid, they're building the eggs. If you probably offer them food every other day, they will probably take it, you know. Dang. That's how like much of pigs they are, you know. And their name fits them, hognose, right? Like another reason why their name fits it, you know.
Right. And that's interesting.
Yeah, so it's very interesting to see that. I've even fed females that are like taking very long to lay eggs, like a meal in between. And they'll take it, like as they're laying eggs, they'll take a meal and keep laying eggs and stuff like that.
I've heard that, and that's just wild. I mean, you know, I've definitely never seen a Sand Boa giving birth and then also
and take a meal
at the same time. I haven't seen that. You know,
yeah.
It seems like with the Sand Boas, it's just more important to have the good body weight and everything kind of before they're gravid, and I just don't think when they're gravid is not time to try to push some body weight on them. You're just, you know, you want to get some nutrition if they want it, but
correct.
I don't think you're really trying to put weight on them at that point. And my concern, I don't really know that you know, that it maybe impacts whether you get stillborns or not, but see, that's something that may be a little bit different than with the eggs. Is with Sand Boas, sometimes you run into these situations where you might get a lot of stillborns in a litter. And I don't know what causes that, you know, but I'm just like, well, I kind of think that an overweight female or very obese females just seem to have a little bit. It seems like they do have a little bit of trouble just getting gravid. Yeah. And then on the flip side, I wonder if that impacts the amount of stillborns they can have. Yeah. And it just seems like everything goes a little bit smoother if I don't try to stuff them full of food while they're gravid.
And then once they give birth and stuff like that, do you still keep that 5-day schedule feeding to get them back up to weight?
It kind of depends on the individual female. Usually they're very hungry, and I'll just kind of give them. When I say I give them all they want, you know, I'm not feeding them every day. Yeah. But you know, I may right after, especially if they look thin, you know, I always wait like one day. So they give birth. I give them, make sure they have water. And then it's the next day, I'll offer them a small meal. And if they do okay with that, then a couple of days later, then I'll offer them maybe a rat pup. And then I'll start, you know, giving them, you know, maybe 2 at a time or maybe every 4 or 5 days, something like that. And just kind of monitor and see if that's putting that weight back on them. Yeah. You know? Yeah. Because they're going to be hungry.
Yeah. I mean, it's got to take a lot of them out of them to be able to produce all those babies. What's the average size of like a feeder you're giving the adult females?
It depends on the size. I mean, almost all of the females, even the small ones, can take like a little rat pup. Okay. And then probably the largest size, I've got some big females that can take a weaned rat. And of course, in those I do frozen thawed. Just for safety issues, that kind of thing. But yeah, the bigger, like your 800 gram or over, that type of thing, those females, they can eat a weaned rat pretty easy.
Yeah. Okay. And I want to get into a little bit of genetics, the last 30 minutes and stuff with that. With Kenyans, I'm pretty sure when you first started, you're saying there was normals, right? That was like the most widely available stuff.
Yeah, there was more than that. I just didn't see it, didn't know about it. But yeah, there probably, before I even got into it, I mean, there were aneries, albinos, and paradox albinos probably before I even got into it. It goes back kind of rough timeline, the 80s, I think like 1985 or early 80s. An anery was actually brought in from the wild.
Yeah.
And then I think it was 1985 was the first captive bred anery was produced. And then you had in the 90s, some other morphs came out, like the albino in 92, 95, I think was your paradox albino was brought into the country. That was actually brought out of the wild as well. And the Barkers did some projects, breeding those. And so, so anyway, with the morphs, there might have been 3 or so.
Okay.
When I got in, I just didn't know about them until later.
Okay. Yeah.
And with the Sand Boa morphs, I mean, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of morphs. What happened there in the 80s and 90s, they were being imported, and then everything just kind of got shut down there. And there was a few maybe in the 2000s, I guess, but there's just we've gone now. It's been, I don't know, over 20 years with no new blood, or very little.
Yeah, for the Kenyan specifically.
Yeah, for the Kenyans, just no new blood. So if you look at the kind of what I call like base morphs, a lot of the just a single gene recessives, there's only maybe 7, 8, something like that, probably less than 10. And anyway, I think the last new one was in 2011 with the paint.
Okay.
And so, it's just that was sort of ever since then, it's just been doing combos, putting together combos, that kind of thing. I think.
And with that, what are you concentrating on one specific like genetics with your Sand Boa projects?
I've got a few different kind of focused projects, I guess there with the Kenyans. One of them that and it seems to be popular in other collections too right now is that double visual albino. And so I know a term that was coined for those by the first person that produced those is a JPB. And so they'll call these the JPBs. It's a visual expression of paradox albino and albino, or bell line albino. There you go. Yeah, at the same time. And so that's when you get that expression of both traits. What like what you're seeing here, and this has another gene in there too, I'll talk about later. But in here you can see the kind of remnants, I guess, of the paradox albino, because you can see some of those little
dark spots.
Shadows, little dark spots. That's where your dark black freckles would have been if it was just only a paradox albino, right? So it is expressing that, but by expressing that sort of T negative look there, that other bell line, there we go, that bell line albino, it wipes out that those freckles, and also tends to brighten up the animal too. And some are, of course, there's variation, just like with your hognose, your sunbursts and solar flares and all that. Some just look brighter than others, and same thing here. But having that double visual really makes a stunning animal. And so anyway, that's something that I think is a sort of a popular project several people are working with. And this one that you're seeing on the screen here, it's also expressing paint at the same time. And so this is a triple recessive visual, or triple visual. There you go.
So is the paint, it's what distorting the pattern, was making the pattern on?
It's kind of like, you think of it maybe as a genetic stripe.
Okay.
Like a recessive. It's a recessively inherited stripe. There's two kind of stripes that you see in Sand Boas. One which has to do, it was different. It's past more of a dominant type inheritance. But this one, the paint, which have usually a wider stripe like this.
Yeah.
This is recessive, you know. And
That's
so,
cool.
so anyway, you're getting three things in one in this animal here. And one of my projects is that working with this particular line here is to also produce these as G-Nex paints as well.
Okay. And you know what's interesting too, where like when I started looking at the Sand Boa, especially the Kenyans, is that you know get into species where there's two actual albino genetics, and that was so confusing. I was like, hold on, you know, there's two different albinos, and you know you can mix them together and you get the JPB, right? It's very interesting to see that. Now, what happens when you add anery to this?
You can end up, if you get the expression of the paradox albino, and well, either albinos and the anery give you a snow,
correct?
Right? Like a paradox snow or an albino snow. So here you would get, just forget the paint for a minute, but if you have the paradox albino, the bell line albino, and the anery being expressed at the same time, you would get a type of snow. It's going to look very different. It's going to be, I don't think I sent you a picture of it, but it's like pure white. And then the few areas where the paradoxing would have been, for some reason, they're usually like these concentrated couple of big splotches, and they'll be tan. And so you get like this white animal with red eyes and a couple of tan spots on it. And that would, you could call it a JPV snow. I've heard some people call it a whiteout, you know?
Okay.
So it's a type of snow that just has both of those albinos in it.
Okay. Yeah. And I'll bring up a paradox albino, you know.
That's a paradox albino paint. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You can see that stripe down his back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the paradoxing, what'll happen here is, unlike a paradox albino without your paint, see a paradox albino, they'll usually have that spotted pattern just sort of randomly distributed, you know, across the body. But with the paint, it won't be inside the stripe there. If it appears like, you notice see how it's all freckled only on the sides?
Correct. Yeah.
And you can look real close. You might see something. You're like, oh yeah, that's inside. You might see one little black dot and think, well, that's inside the line. But really, that was just an area of the pattern that was darker anyway. Wasn't part of the stripe, you know.
Okay.
And so that's something kind of unique about the paradox albino paint is typically, well, no, I mean, it seems like all the time. It's what I've seen is you get the paradoxing on the side. Now, one of the things I thought I'd like to try to do is, how can you make it look like it's all over the body? And I do have one snake where it's got it just like shattered and scattered all over the place. And it's when you put G-Nex into it. And so you get a paradox albino G-Nex paint, and that's going to that really does give the appearance like that melanin distribution is just scattered all over the animal. Yeah.
And then with now with the paradoxing, does the paradoxing develop as they age, or is like they're hatched with that pattern?
They're just born like that, and it doesn't seem to change over time.
Okay.
Yeah, that's cool. Not that I'm aware. I've not observed that.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. That's very interesting. And then, you know, talking about paint and keeping in that that realm, and you know, I used it in the thumbnail, the Anery GX paint.
Yeah.
You know, and that animal was impressive, man.
Yeah, sharp looking snake.
Yeah, the nice clean whites, and then with the paints that we've seen before, these last couple pictures, the stripe is on the dorsal, where this all the patterns on the sides. How does that work?
Yeah, you can kind of think of G-Nex as a pattern reducer.
Okay.
And it seems to be inherited recessively, similar to the paint. It arose with the paint breedings that Jeff Holloway first did, and but anyway, if you're looking at, well, what are the effects of a gene X, and you look at this animal, you can notice on the sides, instead of having the black connected like it would be in a paint, it's all broken up, and especially when it gets to the lower third of the body, it's always broken up even more on the lower third part of the body.
Yeah.
And then on the head, you won't have any eye bars. Those postocular stripes, they won't be there. There won't be head pattern usually. It'll usually get a real clean looking head. No stripes. Now you will get right up. You see where those two dots are at the top of the head?
Correct. Yeah.
Some of them will have like a little head stamp up high like that, or a head stamp. I wouldn't consider that a head stamp really. But some of them will. But I like to breed for the Gene X, the Annery Gene X paints that have that real clean head like that one, that don't have any pattern down on the head. I think it makes that's the look I like,
Yeah. No, and that's a great look. It's a very, like I said, clean, impressive animal. And with what's it called? With Kenny Sand Boas, is there incomplete dominant or dominant traits?
Yeah, I mean, there's dominant type, like, okay. One that I think people know about is like the stripe. So this comes from breeding a solid Rufescens to a Kenyan. That's the way they're kind of commonly called. We could get in taxonomy if you want to, but it's breeding a Rufescens that's solid to a Kenyan with its normal pattern, and the babies come out. Some of them come out having stripes, little thin, kind of jagged stripes down the middle. If you breed that stripe to another normal, about half that litter may come out with stripes. So it's a type of dominant pattern there. Now, another one that maybe, I don't know if it's not talked about very much, and no one may really care, but the head stamp thing I mentioned earlier. Some of the paint, Gene X paints I produce will have a real like bold, kind of wishbone looking head stamp. And that is passed on first generation. Again, so if you breed Gene X paint to Gene X paint, and say that one of them has that head stamp, I see that popping up in about half the babies. So I think there are a few pattern things. I'm not actually aware of any color things that have that sort of dominance.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So mostly recessive stuff working into it. What's cool is that there is pattern recessive morphs. And I think that makes a recessive pattern morph in any species is very what's it called? How can I say? It's very like nice to be able to breed for that. Where like in Hognose we have an incomplete dominant, the conda and super conda in the super form, but that's it, right? Any other pattern stuff like that, it's all line breeding. So it's very a lot of work, and then very hit or miss on when there's no, hey, if I breed this to breed this, I might get one baby that produces that pattern, right? And stuff that I might get 5 and stuff. Where like I always say is once we find another recessive, especially or incomplete dominant gene in Hognose that'll work the pattern, we're gonna be, it's gonna be a lot better. Very interesting to breed. So it's cool to see that there's more. There is that in the Kenyan Sand Boas.
Yeah, you can get some things that change pattern, in the Sand Boas for sure. I guess you're right. Like hogs, it is probably just is it just anaconda or conda and super conda? Yeah. Is that pretty much it? Okay.
Yeah, and then the rest is line breeding and stuff like that pop up. Like you're talking about, maybe the wishbone color pattern stuff like that is just stuff that pops up in certain lineages. So what's your favorite either single gene or combo in the Kenyan Sand Boas?
Oh, single gene. That's a good question. I like a lot of man, that's I like a lot of the combos better than single gene, but okay. I guess, a single gene, I do think, if you get a very clean anery, even if it's not Gene X paint, that looks really good. They always look good.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a good single gene.
Yeah. And then combo?
Oh man. I mean, hey, I'm pushing for more and more combinations here, even this year. And one combo I really like. It's a project into my notes that I keep. I just call it like a sun-kissed project because these animals are coming out like bright orange, solid orange with little black spots here and there from the paradoxing. But they are paradox albino Gene X paint stripes, at least, And so they have those. That's a combo there. And the reason I just call it one word in my notes, like sun-kissed, is because it's a lot to say. Paradox, albino, Gene X, paint, and stripe. I guess you got, and it's what, triple visual, or it's a quad visual, but 3 recessives in there, So anyway, there's 4 things being pushed out there, expressed at once. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
So I do like that one. There was also, I think I sent you a picture of one paradox. I'm just kind of calling these embers, they're paradox Gene X's. And I don't know for sure if all paradox albino Gene X's will look like this. I wonder what other people are doing, if they've produced any, but I'm getting some that have that little kind of like they glow through the pattern there.
Yeah. And, is this one here?
Oh, no, it's not that one. Yeah.
No. Okay.
Yeah. We can talk about that one too, or talk about it later, whichever.
Yeah. Let me see if I can get, and you said paradox albino GX paint?
Yeah, not paint, just not paradox paint. Albino. Yeah, it's going to have like the no eye stripe, I believe. So it'd just be a Gene X, but it'd probably be one of the paradox albinos that I sent you. But
yeah, let me bring one up here. We have this one as well,
and that's just a very nice paradox albino.
Okay,
right there. Yep.
Paradox albino, and then there's one that has it says ember.
That's it.
That's it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'm bringing that up.
And it's a simple. It's like as far as I can tell, it's not a bunch of things combined. Okay. It's paradox albino and it's Gene X. But there might be something else going on there. I'm doing some test crosses, try to figure it out. And so I'm actually I do have a breeder male this year that I'm putting to at least one female just to see what I get. But you can see how with this one, I think what's cool. I mean, you got the cleaner head. They also have in the pattern that sort of glowing color that's kind of coming through.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's like you said, like also no pattern on the face and stuff like that. And it looks like almost like a giraffe type pattern, right? Like it's pretty cool to see with that. Interesting. So what is your test breeding going to be to figure this out and trying to prove it out?
Well, eventually I would like to get a female like this, breed the male to the female. I don't have a female that looks like this yet. And so right now I'm breeding one of these to a stripe that is het paradox albino Gene X. I think Gene X paint. Yeah. So, really, I don't want all those genes coming out at the same time, and it'd be really unlikely to hit on all those, right? And what I'm hoping to hit on there is the paradox albino, the Gene X. If the stripe's in there, it'd be cool to see, what this does. But but yeah, so I am trying to I'm hoping to hit on some more of these, produce some more of these, maybe even with the stripe. That'd be cool.
Yeah. If you could produce, or like, and I understand what you're working towards, like just the paradox about Gene X, just to try to see if you could replicate it, right?
And right now I'm a bit limited. I just don't have a female with these exact genetics to pair, and so I'm just going with kind of my next best thing. Yeah.
So now let's talk about this, because it's labeled as unknown morph. So it's definitely wanted to bring this up and talk about it.
Yeah. So I mean, the short story of that is I don't know what it is. Okay. I wish I knew. And I've posted this, on Instagram, Facebook a few times, and nobody's really that chimed in on it, I guess. But actually a few comments that a few people are like, "Man, what's wrong with its eyes?" or "Looks like it's got something in its eye." But I don't know how to pick up on this with a camera really well. But its eyes are like this, just metallic, it's like a dark silver, maybe.
Okay.
And they just shine like that in the light. It does look very different than any of the eyes I've seen on other snakes or other sand boas. And so I don't know what's going on with that. It's the first one I've had with eyes that color. Then, of course, what you have here, you can see kind of the greenish hues with the white and then the orange mixed in. And so I don't know if this is just sort of a anomaly, one-off type thing, some developmental thing that's not really genetic in terms of being inheritable. I don't know.
Yeah. What was the parent that produced this animal?
One of the parents was an albino paint that was het paradox albino, and also het anery. And then the other parent, trying to, I'm drawing a blank on it for some reason. Oh yeah, it was JPB paint. So a lot going on there, I guess.
Yeah. So for sure, 2 paint animals, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. 2 paint animals, and it's like, well, maybe this is a paint. Doesn't really. I don't know. You got a lot going on there.
Yeah, there's a lot of different. I think there's no rhyme or reason to the pattern, first of all, and then the coloration of the pattern too, as well. Very, very interesting. Yeah. And it's a male or female, this animal?
It's a female.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's your thoughts in the future to work with it?
Yeah. Well, got a while to figure it out. I don't know. I am wondering, like, what type of pairing should I do? Maybe. I mean.
Yeah.
Maybe a pair. If at the time, see, I've got some things this year I might produce. Maybe I could breed to it if I get it like a JPB G-Nex paint. Maybe going that route, or I don't know. Maybe I should. The flip side is go simple with this. I mean, it could go the direction of a Doma or a normal or something, and try to sort out. Make the long, try to sort out some genes here. Try to figure out what. That way,
what popped up and stuff.
Yeah. And it's a long. I don't know. This looks like it's going to be a long project.
And then something interesting, because we talk about how small the gene pool is, because of of bringing stuff to that. It's got to make it more difficult to be able to like breed back to a parent or a sibling, because of the small gene pools as well. Where other species that have such a large gene pool is more forgiving, right?
Right. Yeah. And I always try to be kind of, I guess, cognizant of the crosses and the line breeding. And it doesn't seem, if you do breed related individuals, one generation doesn't seem to have negative effect. You can compare, like I've bred unrelated individuals and seen some deleterious effects before, you know, like a missing eye or a kink in the back. And I'm like, they're not related at all, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's hard. It's easy for us to say, if you do inbreed once and you see that, it's easy to just be like, oh, that's why. But I mean, I've seen that before in unrelateds. And when I do cross-related things, I don't, you know, don't see a lot of that, but I also outcross where I can, and to try to prevent anything, just as a precaution. And one of the things I did, like I try to plan out. I'm sure you guys do this with like your hognose. You know, you plan out well in advance, like what you're gonna try to run how you're gonna try to run these projects. And from what I understand, like with hognose, you do have to worry about how many times you cross in, and so you really got to plan this out, put some forethought. And so I try to do that with the Kenyans. So for example, like with my JPB stuff, I've got 2 completely separate lines. So I started out breeding, you know, paradox albinos and albino paints together on one side, and then completely separate paradox albinos and albinos on the other side, so that I've got these, you know, 2 sets and 2 lines that I can work with there, you know?
Yeah, no, I think we're about the same boat, where like you need to at least be able to run 2 or 3 lines of a similar project to be able to, you know, go by this way and then come back in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is very,
because I don't want to see any inbreeding depression. You know, I want my projects to go good and everything have good kind of maybe call it hybrid vigor or whatever. And because I do remember in the past, you know, decades ago, like I had some splash, and they just that I had bought, and man, those things they wouldn't breed, and they just didn't work. Some of them wouldn't feed, wouldn't breed. And I just wonder if that was a bit of inbreeding depression going on. I don't know.
And the splash, is it a line bred trait, or is it like a recessive, or still in the works?
That's a good question. My understanding is recessive. However, I say this, and this is, I'm not an expert with a splash. I don't have a lot of experience with them. I did work with them early on. I just wasn't very successful, and sort of abandoned ship on that. And then but Jeff Holloway, he actually was successful in outcrossing a lot of those. And I think a lot of the ones over time, a lot of the ones that you'd see that were doing really well, I know some of those came from him, and I'm sure some other people did it too. I'd just not be aware, but yeah, the splash seems to be more of a recessive. And however, you know, you can breed splash to splash, and get some animals that just almost don't even look splash, you know, and so I think there's a lot of variation.
Yeah,
but there's a lot of variation in that phenotype.
Yeah, and that's why I asked, because I've heard of that situation happening where you know, you get animals that are I guess are splash, right, but just don't it doesn't come up.
And what I haven't followed there, I guess the way you go about, like if you got that animal that is from a splash to splash, and it just you know, you think you see, you can kind of imagine that it's got a little bit of splash. I guess you breed that to a splash, see what happens there. That might give you a clue as to whether it was really a splash or not, you know.
Yeah.
But I've never done those breeding with that morph. I've not. I'm just kind of going off of what
you're seeing online and stuff like that.
Yeah, I really am with that one. I don't have a lot of experience with that one.
Yeah. And you know what, man, and I think that's an interesting part, because like it's hard to be able to be in every single project in the species, right?
Yeah, I don't want to.
Yeah, at some point you got to pick, like, what are your favorites? What do you like the most, and work that stuff and try to refine it, right? I think that's the best approach in certain things, because, man, I look at the ball python world, and I mean, the amount of genetics they have, it's wild, right?
It's insane.
And hognose, you know, we have a handful now too. We got probably close to 20 now, you know, between the recessives and the 2 incomplete dominants. And it seems like maybe every 2 to 3 years, maybe every about 5 years, there's something popping up, right? So if we keep in that trend, it's like, man, where are we 15 years from now, with extra stuff and trying to
might be on that ball python runaway train too, I don't know. Yeah. What's your favorite like hognose project you got going there?
So it's funny because like I didn't think about it until somebody asked me my favorite genetics. And Toffee Belly is very, I like it a lot because I like it in a lot of combos. So I like the Toxics, which is Toffee Belly Azantic. And then I like the Toffee Belly Sables. So those are one of my two favorites. And just Toffee Belly on its own is a very nice animal. And what's interesting about Toffee Belly, now, I asked about the paradox, the albino, is where, as they age, they develop more paradoxing.
Hey, that's right. Those do. Yeah. I remember that now. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's very interesting to have animals like maybe it was born 1 or 2 dots, and as it ages, it starts creating those darker, melanin spots and stuff like that. So that's one of my favorite stuff.
Cool.
And then just adding other genetics, like I have albino, is a staple. But then I'm also a believer like albino doesn't belong in every combo either. Just to add an extra gene. So I'm one of those people like, and maybe it might bite me in the ass later on. But I try to keep my projects separate, especially with the albino lineages and stuff like that. Maybe I'll add, like now I added, there's this project called Acid Rain, which is a Toffee Belly Azantic Sable visual. There's only been a handful produced so far, but I'm working towards that as well because it's a very unique looking animal. It's grays with bluish and purples all mixed in.
Oh, cool.
So it's very interesting to see. Unfortunately, I haven't seen an adult yet. I've only seen baby pictures. So, that's always the game of like, looks beautiful as a baby. And for hognose, we're lucky because a lot of the babies look just as good as their adults, right? For the most part. With that
some of those seem to get like they deepen in some of that saturation, the color saturation or whatever.
That. And then I am working what's it called? A pattern lineage, a line bred trait, which is it's called reverse stripe, and within that lineage, you get reverse stripe. So similar to the GX paint, where you get the saddle is empty and you get pattern on the sides. And then within that same lineage, you get a variation of tiger stripes, so you get full stripes banding around it.
Okay, cool.
And then you'll get a twin spot where it's like 2 little spots
I've
down
seen those, the twin spot. That's really cool. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, so within that same lineage, you'll get the variation, all that stuff. So I've been working that the last 2 years and trying to get more of him and keeping whenever I get like the really nice examples, I'll keep them to see if where we go with the breeding with that. But yeah, and one other thing we didn't bring up was the Doma, right?
Oh yeah.
And this picture is very impressive because I've seen the Domas at expos and stuff like that, but never anything like this. Now with the Doma lineage, it's a locality trait, correct?
Right. That's what
it started off at least as.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Who knows now? I think it'd be tough to, unless you're keeping up with records and where they came from, and on some of mine I have, but it's hard to maybe tell a pure one from one that's not pure. Yeah.
And it's interesting because technically this is a normal, right? Kenyan Sand Boa, because it has no other recessive and stuff like that added to this one.
Correct. Yeah, this is just a pure Doma.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
And so the history, I guess I'm sure you know this. I don't know if all your viewers kind of depends on if they're maybe Sand Boa people or not, but like this is one that sort of the hallmark characteristics of the Doma is having that cleaner head. They might have some speckles, but they won't have any postocular stripe, and the pattern's reduced. The orange stays clean. it doesn't start out necessarily very orange, but it gets more of a vivid orange, or a deeper orange as they grow. Although there can be color variation there. There's yellow Dodoma or canary Dodoma as they call them. Okay. But anyway, that's kind of that little color description there and pattern description. That's your Dodoma. Okay. Yeah, I think I will say this, like those were originally from Dodoma to Tanzania, which is where they get their name. But I think what can make it confusing sometimes is my understanding is, and this goes from talking with several breeders, even Dave Tracy Barker, years ago that brought these in, or that had some of these at the beginning. Not all of them had this appearance that were from that area, but I think us as hobbyists, we just wanted this look, right? And so even though there were some that didn't look as good, that didn't maybe have these characteristics, and they were from Dodoma, there were even some with eye stripes that came from that area. But I remember, I didn't know all that at the beginning. When I first saw Dodomas back in the late, I was probably 99 or 2000, I saw a picture on kingsnake.com and I was like, "Ooh, I like that," and I bought a pair. And so anyway, that is what I think our, the herpetoculture community is sort of adopted as, this is the look of the Dodoma. And that's what we all kind of sought after. And we kind of pegged that as being the one that's pure, right? And probably because anything else is just hard to, because like when you mix one like this with a normal, a lot of the babies, or all your babies have come out, normal, good looking normals, but not like this, Okay. And so there's some like confusion and debate around this whole Dodoma thing, but I think the simplest way to state it is, the picture you see right there, that's a Dodoma,
Okay. So with that being said, with the lineage and stuff like that, how do you maintain this look?
Yeah, so I do have a line that I've had since the first started out as a pair, and then I acquired another from the same person. So I had trio, and then those I call King line, after Tim King was the person I purchased them from. And so those are, to my knowledge, those are your pure animals. I do have some other Dodomas that they do look pure. They're not, if I don't, that's not my King line animals. I don't know if they, they have the look, but there's what you can do is you can get, like if you breed a Dodoma to a normal, for example, and then if you were to, breed those back together, you can get animals that look Dodoma, and you can't hardly tell them apart, and so that can make it a little bit confusing. It's very difficult now to tell if the Dodomas you're getting have stuff mixed in them or not,
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. And I guess that's got to be difficult too, where, how do you know of other people still breeding the King line Dodomas?
Yeah. There's, I think it's just like with your hogs or the corns and balls and all these different, you have some people that are like purists, and they just want to, latch on to the low-cal stuff and keep it pure. And so there are some people that do that. And then there's people that kind of go the opposite direction with that. So there's people that do it. And I kind of feel I like the kind of diversity of thought. I do like certain things, in my collections. I like to keep some pure lines. I like low-cal stuff. But I also like to see what happens if we mix Dodoma with Paradox albino, and if we eventually make some Dodoma influenced Paradox albinos, what's that going to look like? And so I like both games.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's developing different breedings and looks. Sometimes you have to experiment with some stuff, right? And see what happens. Again, like if we try to stay in that very square box of how to breed something, how to simple setup, care for it. It gets very I I think, dicey in that situation because there's so many variables that can happen.
I think there's not like you're saying there on care and stuff. I'm not a believer that there's just only one way to do things. I think there's a lot of different good ways to do things, and sometimes the best way for one person and their snake might be different than the other. With things we were talking about earlier, like looking at how to control humidity, and if you choose to use substrate with that, one substrate you use might be different than somebody else. And it may be better for your circumstance, but not for theirs,
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So Rufus, we're getting here to the end. Any other like topic that you wanted to bring up, or any like specific project you're working on?
I guess the only one that comes to mind, since I've got some Russian Sand Boas that are very close to shedding right now. And anyway, my focus there is usually your super blacks. I've produced albinos here and there in the past. And right now I got kind of a project I've been working on with those Russian Sand Boas that I'm really looking forward to see what happens. And these are goldens, or sometimes just call them golden albinos. And so I'm really looking forward to see what I get with that project this year, if anything. But those are those are albino cinnamons. And
we'll bring it up here.
Okay, yeah, there you go. There it is. Yeah. And so for people that are used to looking at Russian Sand Boas, if they see this, they might not recognize it as a Russian. I don't know, because the color is very different, right? And so anyway, what you can do is like the different color phases of Russians will all look different depending on if they're albino, right? So you can mix albino in with the different phases and you get different looks with each one of them. So not every albino looks the same. And so this is one of my favorites here. And give you an idea how it's different is like an albino super black is going to be bright orange as a baby, but then it browns out. It kind of reminds me of like, now I guess the hognose don't brown out, but the hognose, you got like sable and albino, get that, the sunburst.
The sunburst, the bright orange.
So you get a dark animal and an albino, and you get this just super orange, right? And that's what happens with the albino super black, but it browns out. But these, when you put the albino with the cinnamon, it does this. And I've to my knowledge, I've not known anybody else to produce these yet. And I've got a few of these, and that's the first golden to golden breeding happening this year. And I don't know, that's the fun part is like, I suspect that the babies, most of them will look
like this.
Will look like this. But who knows? It's never been done, and that's one of the fun things about it is like, hey, will something super cool happen or unexpected? It's going to be fun to find out.
That's cool. Yeah, man. So anyway, and after talking to you and seeing some of these pictures that you sent me about the Russians, I think I might need to add a pair of Russians to the collection because they're really cool. I really like the speckled and black look.
Oh yeah.
That is very nice. But they're interesting looking animals too. Where add another Sand Boa species to the collection.
Yeah. And if you ever decide to breed them, they just go well with hognose anyway.
They're right in the same temperatures
you might as well get some neighbors for your hognose there.
That's right.
Well. Yeah.
Cool. Before we close out, give us a quick where can we find you? Where can we find any of your productions that coming up and stuff like that?
Sure. Yeah. I'm of course I've got a website which is just rufusdardenreptiles.com. Also under the Rufus Darden Reptiles at Facebook and Instagram. I'm also on Morph Market. And then the scheduled shows I could tell you about is I'll be at the Southeast. I'll be at that Southeast Reptile Expo in Atlanta on August 9th. And then, of course, I'm always at Tinley. So I'll be set up at Tinley in the fall and the spring. Okay, cool. All right. Yeah. Your website is linked in the description below. So, guys, if you're going to, take a look, great looking website, by the way. There's a good information on there. I was taking a look at it. I think, and me included,
I think more people need to have their reptile websites and stuff like that to keep, projects information and stuff like that. Not just the animals they're selling, but just an overview of what you're working with and stuff like that. So good job on that.
Cool,
and again, thank you for joining us tonight. Any last words before we say goodnight to the viewers tonight?
Well, I really enjoy talking with you about it. I always enjoy talking Sand Boas, Hognose too. I'm a fan of those. And but yeah, thank you for having me on. It was good.
Yeah, well, we appreciate it, guys. We're looking forward to seeing you guys in 2 weeks. So make sure you guys take a look of our schedule for the next podcast. And again, thank you, Rufus, for joining us tonight. And we'll see you guys on the next one. Have a